Now you can imagine, Shrikant, I've grown up in India. I went to Indian schools. I had no clue how schools functioned inside a classroom here, although again, our kids grew up here, but one didn't know what was happening inside a classroom. So it was important for me to see if I could actually be that person who could be teaching the kids. And that was a real eye-opener. I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. I went to 5 different schools, 5 different types of schools, state schools, private schools, math subject, physics subject, the different types of things. And I then, got the decision that this is exactly what I want to be doing. I felt I was very privileged, having received outstanding education. And I felt the best way that I could contribute to the society was to give that same education to people who may not get that similar kind of opportunity.
Welcome to Inspire Someone Today podcast, a show where we dive into the stories and insights that has the power to create ripples of inspiration in your life. I'm your host Shrikant, and I'm thrilled to be with you on this journey of inspiration. Hey, my dear listeners, welcome back to yet another episode of Inspire Someone Today. With me today is a very special guest. Special for me, I have known him for over 2 decades, but not in the avatar that is today, but a thorough gentleman, my mentor, and somebody who had a high-flying finance career. He left it behind to become a high school math teacher. So glad to be talking to this teacher. Joining me all the way from London is Deepak Swaroop. Deepak, welcome to this episode of Inspire Someone Today.
Thank you, Shrikant. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. So Deepak, like I said, I have known you as somebody who had been in the corporate world for many, many decades. And to be talking to you, knowing that you have kind of changed paths to do something that you were passionate about. And that something is you are now a math teacher. How did this transition happen? What made you to shift lanes and take on something from a world that you are not used to the world that you're so passionate about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And if you look back, you tend to think that it was a kind of a dramatic shift in what I was doing. Actually, it wasn't as dramatic as that. I would say the thought was planted in my mind well before I left EY, when I used to follow Lucy Kellaway, who was a brilliant Financial Times columnist. And I read that she had decided to get into teaching at the age of 58 or 60 or thereabouts. And that struck me as something I should look into when I was ready. Of course, at that time, it all seemed so far away, and I didn't even think it would happen one day. But I would say, in some ways, the last 5 years in my corporate career, they were quite defining. I got into something known as robotic process automation and related automation efforts. At that time, it was very new. So I'm talking about almost now 10 years ago. And that required me to study again. I had to get back to doing some courses with Coursera and in fact, one with MIT as well in artificial intelligence. And I sat down with programmers to fully understand what they were doing, because that wasn't something which I had done in my time. And I realized the importance of continuous learning. And I felt that that was giving me extra energy, and I was feeling it was more energizing, it was more uplifting. So I guess perhaps when I left, I thought the next best thing to do would be to do a startup. And so that was the first idea that came to my mind from that high-flying role I had in EY. I met some people who I thought would be good partners to start this effort. And as we got into the first few months and strategizing, developing a vision and so on and so forth, I realized that perhaps we were 2 different type of professionals and it wasn't going to work out. And so I realized that I should probably step away from that effort And at that time, the thought came back as to let's try what Lucy had tried many years ago, which is get into teaching. And that is when I actually started thinking about what do I do next? How do I even attempt, having not been with kids for a couple of decades? It was seemingly a big challenge at that point in time.
Very interesting start there. And I'm not surprised because you started off as an engineer, more into the finance world. You're managing big deal, restructuring, valuations of sorts, played multiple roles, and now falling into this world of studies, world of education. And you did mention about the calling that you have heard about somebody taking this leap at the age of 58, and then that kind of prompted you to do that. But at that point of time, making this particular decision, what kind of self-doubts that you had to kind of fight it out in your mind, saying that, okay, is this the age? Is this the profession? Is this the time? I'm sure you would have many such questions. How did you go about addressing those?
So I think the biggest question in my mind was, do I want to spend time with kids? And, so we have two boys, and obviously we spend time with them as parents, and between, whatever else we do in our working lives. But we actually being in a job where you're just focused on kids was not something that was going to come naturally to me. So I was actually scared of that in a funny way. And I signed up for reading books to differently abled children in our local library. And it was really funny because the first time I went there, the teachers from the school where these children came, and my wife as well, they said, you seem to enjoy this totally. And the kids were just loving the way you were saying it and explaining it to them. And then I felt a little bit more confident that maybe, yes, I can deal with kids. I'm not entirely a monster. So I then decided to figure this out a bit more. I spoke to the Department for Education here in the UK, is very helpful. They set me up with some schools where I could go in for a day and sit in a classroom and observe what goes on in a classroom. Now you can imagine, Shrikant, I've grown up in India. I went to Indian schools. I had no clue how schools functioned inside a classroom here, although again, our kids grew up here, but one didn't know what was happening inside a classroom. So it was important for me to see if I could actually be that person who could be teaching the kids. And that was a real eye-opener. I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. I went to 5 different schools, 5 different types of schools, state schools, private schools, math subject, physics subject, the different types of things. And I then, got the decision that this is exactly what I want to be doing. Of course, the whole aspect of how young my colleagues would be hadn't yet hit me, which actually happened next.
Uh-huh. In this whole process, what was that eureka moment for you, Deepak?
The eureka moment for me was during one of these lessons. So the teacher said, you can, walk around and look at children's books and what they're doing. And as I was walking around, one of the children, I still remember, was a 13-year-old, so year 9 student, asked me a question. And I responded to that question. And there was a certain spark in her eyes that she understood how to solve that problem in maths. And that was such a thrilling experience to see someone firstly take something away from you as a person, as a knowledge or as something that they will be able to leverage and use, and the thrill and the excitement that they got out of that. So to me, that was a big sort of eureka moment for me. Yeah.
And again, after having such a long stint in the corporate world, what are some of the adjustments that you have made in this new world of yours?
Many of them. I had to unlearn many things and relearn many things. To start with, the most mundane in the corporate world, at least for the last 20, 25 years, I was always assisted by some brilliant executive assistants, secretaries, whatever you call them. They were running half my life, and they were absolutely brilliant. I was supported by a great team of leaders who would take care of their parts of the organization. Now, I was all by myself. There was no one to help me. And even if I had to go and photocopy something or print something, I had to do it. I had to go find a printer that worked and had to make sure that I printed out enough copies for my lesson to be ready. So mundane things like that, I would say, sound simple, but readjusting to that reality that now you're on your own and that you have to deal with all aspects of. So I'll give you a story. For example, a student in my class threw up. Okay, now when you have a class of 30 students who are 11, 12-year-old students, and if one of them throws up, guess what the rest of the class does? They scream, they shout. They don't want to be in the class. And you're dealing with a situation and you're the only one. There's no phone in the room to pick up and call the cleaner to come and clean the room. You have to first take care of the kids. That's your primary responsibility. And you have to go find the cleaner. And then you have to entertain those kids till such time the smell has left the room. So, there are a lot of these stories. I can spend a lot of time telling you all these stories. But, for example, a spider dropping from the roof and how that can, change the whole mood of the class.
Your corporate experience has not prepared you for all of this. So how are you managing it?
None of that. You can't be prepared for it. So it's a real-time experience of managing people and a real-time sort of reaction, which brings out who you really are. And so I think it's a tremendous self-awareness building that takes place.
And in lot many ways, it's also that big shift, right? You did mention about you had the luxury of having admin assistants, having able-minded folks around you to manage your day-to-day stuff. And over here, you're dealing with the 15-year-olds. So how do you kind of see what has been your observation so far working with, interacting with 15-year-olds, the teenagers, the workforce of the future? So what has been your learnings, your observations so far?
I think the most important thing you see is they are growing up in an environment and they're experiencing an environment as kids, which is an experience which we had when we were kids, right? Except it's about 40 years apart. Okay, so now they're growing up and they're experiencing this environment of significant amount of technology, distractions driven by technology, challenges from use of social media, the emergence of AI, all of that is coming at them at full speed. And you have to be able to navigate that world for them and help them understand how they're going to make sense of all that and how will they build their careers in that environment. And I think that is a big sort of change. So, the first year, I remember someone asked me, so what's your Snapchat score? Snap score or Snapchat score, something like that. Now, I had used Snapchat only to see what it was, but I had deleted the app after that from my phone. So I had no clue what Snapchat score was. And that's when you start realizing that you need to be also in tune with what's happening in the lives of the young people. And I have since made a lot of effort to make sure that I am connected to that so I can relate to their issues. I think building relationships with the 15-year-olds is most important for a teacher. And this is a relationship of trust. Students believe everything a teacher says. In fact, sometimes at home, I'm sure you might have experienced that as well. Kids come home and say, you are wrong. My teacher said this, and that is more correct. Yeah. And you as a parent sort of, fret and frown. But that's the level of relationship and confidence and trust that kids have in you. And so you have a very, very significant responsibility with respect to them. And I, in particular, I decided to go in for a state school, which is like government schools in India. And, you have a lot of underprivileged children who come in those schools. And my key reason and purpose of getting into teaching was driven by desire to contribute back to the society. And this was a really good vehicle for that. And in that environment, when these underprivileged children come into school, they might come from broken families. They might come from situations where they're being abused. They might come from very poor families. And you are that bright light in the day for them. And the school is that safe environment for them. And you have to make the most of it for them so that they can grow into good citizens. That's a huge responsibility. So,
yep, it's a noble profession and a big, big responsibility to take care of. I'm so happy that you went down that path. Just yesterday, I was looking at this meme, which was in the early 80s when students were using calculators. The math teachers used to run behind them not to use it. And we are here in 2024, where students are using Gen AI. And what is this math teacher telling them about it?
So I think one thing I would say the number of experiences of the corporate life which one benefits from in teaching. And one of them is change is a constant, right? So they might be dealing with Gen AI now, but in 10 years' time, they might be dealing with something completely different. So one part is to how to deal with Gen AI today, but the other part is how do you become that resilient, continuous learner, ready to accept change, ready to learn new things, which will then enable you to be successful in the future. And these things go hand in hand. AI in itself is still not widely used in education. There are some challenges around how do you deal with examination if you were to bring in Gen AI. So if, for example, you were to write an essay and you're given that as a homework, someone could go and ask Gen AI to come up with an essay on the same topic. And very difficult for the teacher to figure out whether it was written by the student or not. If it is more analytical, then yes, maybe, but not in general topics. Now, they are going to deal with this situation when they go into work. They might be asked to deliver something which is rapid. Can they make changes to something quickly? Can they get the core from somewhere? Can they recognize what's been developed by Gen AI as against a real human? Can they add value to what has been delivered by them? These are questions to be answered. Now that the education system is still not ready to drive that kind of learning. And I think that's going to take time as the technology develops.
Fair enough. And looking back, Deepak, you had such a great career. Now you have kind of poured it into something that you're passionate about. For the benefit of our listeners, where did this story all begin for Deepak? What was his growing up years like? What did he dream of? And how do you kind of connect that dot backwards now?
I think the school that you go to always has an important impact on you. I think the family and the environment you grow in also has an important impact on you. And somewhere we were always given the education or guidance that while you might be doing well, there are millions others who don't do as well. And I felt I was very privileged having received outstanding education. And I felt the best way that I could contribute to the society was to give that same education to people who may not get that similar kind of opportunity. And that aspect of giving back to society, I think, is a product of your school time, your environment that you're exposed to, what family values you pick up along the way. And those are the things I think which have always been important. And I know it's not just me. I think there are millions of executives in different levels, parts of their careers, who feel the same. And they would love to get an opportunity to do something which would benefit their environment, their society, what have you, social. And there's such a lot of good work going on in India as well. And I would really, really encourage people to think of, what drives their passion. For me, it was teaching. For others, it might be something else.
That's a beautiful and wonderful segue into what I would want to go next. Is you are in many ways giving many people to define their second half, the second careers. You are now at that forefront of it, having figured it out, having had your own entrepreneurial venture. If people are to start thinking about their half-time careers, how can one start preparing for it? How can one start planning for it?
So every person's situation is different. So I cannot generalize, but I would say most of us are driven by the work that we're doing, right? And I think that's one should always be clear about the purpose of what you're doing. And if that purpose is being fulfilled, and it need not be some grand esoteric purpose of, solving world problems or whatever. It can be, I need to earn enough money, right? And if that is the case, then you should think about, are you achieving what you wanted to achieve from what you're doing? And perhaps you have saved enough. Perhaps you're not ready to do something which is not driven by money making. All those things could impact your decision as to what to do next. But somewhere I found a lot of people don't realize when to stop making money. So you have to figure that out for yourself. What is the comfort zone to get to before you start thinking of, okay, now that I've done this enough, I should now think about what do I do next, which will actually fulfill my sort of aspirations of doing something different. Okay, so that doing something different for some people could be to learn how to play a musical instrument. For some people, it might be to spend time, getting into some social work. You could be contributing, you could be a CFO of a NGO, or you could be a CEO of an NGO. So there could be any number of those things which are not as highly paid, but it could satisfy you. And so you need to start thinking about firstly planning and making sure don't walk away from your regular work, because that you got into that for a reason. And you spent 15, 20, 25, 30 years doing that, and you are really good at that. So don't walk away from it till you achieve the objective of why you got into it. Once you feel and you have to really ask yourself the question really hard. Once you achieve that, you felt you achieved it, you should then get into thinking about, what do I want to do? And if I then know what I want to do, then the next question is, how will I go about doing it? Who's going to help me? Because it's not always easy to. So for me, if I was getting into teaching, I had no clue how to get into teaching. How could I even become a teacher? I had no idea. And that also sitting in UK, where I came to UK when I was 34 years old. And so you have to then start doing some research, talking to people, finding it out for yourself. And then you need the tenacity to make the change, right? So that's no different from change management in a corporate environment.
Those are some very practical advice, practical tips there. I'll touch upon a couple of elements that you mentioned, right? I think to each their own. That's the essence of what you're trying to say here, because you got to figure out what is your passion. You got to figure out what's your purpose. But fundamentally, you also mentioned about you got to be at a point where you say, how much is enough? And then take a call. And that's the most difficult question, to fight those demons out, right? So how do you kind of fight those demons of, in this example, a high-paying, stable job versus say getting into something what you did to a school or getting into a not-for-profit? How do you kind of take that balance?
It's tough. It does require. So for me, the other aspect is I think our upbringing also brings out a certain level of spiritual side of it. And I was very keen that I need to get into something which is more selfless than driven by what I want to achieve. So that was my sort of way of dealing with it. But having a higher purpose in what you do allows you to move in that direction. So you define that higher purpose for you. All of us can do maths, as in we can all work out the numbers. We can all see how much we spend every month, how much we need, how much investment we have, how much savings we have. We can all work those things out. We perhaps do it every month to make sure we are safe. And using that, you have to then get to a point to say, okay, now I am going to pursue something which is more for a higher purpose. And then you have to take the plunge.
Okay. I'll ask you one more thing, Deepak. This is very interesting. And I'm sure a lot many people would want to have answers. Like you said, there are no ready-made answers. So each one should find answers for their own. Having said that, since you have figured it out, what were some of those visible cues that you had? So you mentioned about purpose. You mentioned about having that contentment towards money and moving on. So when did you see that, okay, you had the cues to take that plunge to make that decision?
In between the sort of walking away from my startup and thinking about getting into education, there was a period of a few months. And that period, I realized that I could as well just go for playing golf, or I could read books. I can join a painting class. I could travel the world. So I had all those options in front of me. And I then asked myself, is that going to be fulfilling enough? And that is the question you have to ask yourself. Is what you are thinking of doing going to be fulfilling enough? And one is, of course, if you're physically, you've aged and you don't have the capability to do certain things, then you shouldn't do that. But if you are physically capable, if you have that time, if you have something to give without expecting anything in return, then I think you should pursue that.
Great, wonderful, great inputs there. So what's been the most difficult thing of being a teacher so far?
There's nothing difficult about being a teacher. It is just so wonderful. I'll tell you, I wake up sometimes in the morning and I got a backache or a pain in the neck or something. I walk into the school, within an hour or so, everything's gone.
How
because
nice.
It's such a positive environment. When a student calls out from the other end of the corridor and says, "Good morning, sir," you feel uplifted and things of that kind. So I think, again, it's an attitude. It is a very physical job. And since you have to stand in front of the class for a number of hours and deliver, so you have to be ready for the physicality of it. It requires a lot of preparation. It is not a part-time job. It is a full-time job. Many people think, oh, teaching, it is a part, it's something you can do. That's not a problem. No, if you want to teach properly in a school, then it's more than a full-time job. And so you have to be clear about that. But is there anything really difficult about what's the most difficult thing? Nothing. It's just a lot of enjoyment.
Nice. One of the other myths I want you to bust, which you have busted by virtue of doing what you have done now. You are a partner in the Big Four. You had a great job at the helm for so many years. And then you made this decision. Invariably, what stops many people to make those decisions is, if I were to use a Hindi phrase, log kya kahenge? What do people think of my decision? Right? That decision itself will stop so many people from making a decision because log kya kahenge? So how did you bust that myth, and what is your word of advice for everybody thinking on log kya kahenge mindset?
I'm very proud of you to have asked that question, because that hits at the crux of it all, right? And however much we might say we don't care what people say, we do care. And you do have social engagements. You do have a family. You do have your extended family who will ask these questions. And it was actually quite funny in a way. Everyone that I've met have actually said, that's a great thing you're doing. I'm just surprised how you're even managing to do it. But the doubt came from me, within me, rather than from someone expressing it externally. And often in the initial years, so I would sort of look at people talking to me and say, is he or she saying this because now I'm not such a high-flying leader and they're just saying it like that? And, those things do come. So I'll be totally honest with you. Those things do come out but the moment you start thinking about, so it's all in the mind. End of the day, this is all in your mind. If you start thinking about what difference you are making and the purpose that you are fulfilling, then what people say would never matter to you, notwithstanding the fact that people always said good things, including my own two boys when I spoke to them, saying, oh, that's fantastic. That's what you like to do. Then, you should definitely do that. And I think the biggest encourager was my wife. And she was like, I can see that when you come back from school, you're so elated. So there must be something happening there, so you should just continue doing it. So I think it's everyone would support you if you yourself believe in it. You have to believe in it, I would say, and self-doubts do arise. So there's no running away from that, but you have to overcome them, and then eventually you'll get there.
So basically, you got to work on two selves, self-belief and self-doubt.
Very well said. I will say that people are so happy talking with me, hearing about the stories, because none of our, so my friends are people of my age and backgrounds, and none of them have experienced this, right? So for them, this is, there are a couple of them who are looking to get into teaching. So it's great.
I'm telling you, when I read about this, I had no figment of imagination that Deepak could do something like this. And then I saw you doing stuff and you enjoying doing this stuff. I was just proud that I can relate to what you are doing. So I know where this is coming from. Okay, here we are with Deepak Swaroop and talking through his career transitions and talking to him about his role as a math teacher. Now we slip into the power of three round. The first of the power of three round question, Deepak. 3 things you look forward to when you go to your class.
Students, their learning, and one naughty child.
Good. 3 traits that you have observed in children that you were missing in the corporate world.
Positivity, respect, and trust.
Good going, teacher. If Deepak Swaroop were to give 3 pieces of advice to his older self, what would those 3 pieces of advice be?
Be positive. And I would say that would be my first, second, and third answer. I think in the corporate world, we tend to be very skeptical of people's motives. Be positive, always positive and positive. So positive, positive, positive.
Okay. And if you were to kind of relay 3 best advice that you have received during your career, what are those 3 advice that has helped you in good stead?
Never be afraid of changing roles. Always be prepared for what's possibly going to come next, which means you need to re-educate yourself or develop yourself to be ready for what's coming next, and be resilient. Whatever happens, just be resilient, because things might look bad today, they'll get better tomorrow.
Nice. If there's no limitation, 3 individuals that you would like to have lunch or dinner with?
The 3 individuals would be, for me, one of them would be Mahatma Gandhi for his contribution to society and social work. And I'd like to understand what motivated him to spend a lifetime doing that. My second person would be a mathematician, Andrew Wiles, who is credited with finally solving Fermat's last theorem, a very important journey that he took to be able to solve that. Third person would be Sudha Murthy. She is, I'm a big fan of hers for what she's achieved in life and what she's doing now. She's a member of the NCRT committee in India and clearly very influential, and I would love to meet with her. Thank you.
3 book recommendations.
I'll give one maths book, Fermat's Last Theorem.
Mm-hmm.
It's by this author named Singh. It's a book on trust.
Stephen Covey. Speed
by
of
Stephen
Trust.
Covey. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the one I would say is very important for people to read. Third book, I would say read the Gita.
Nice. Wonderful. The last of the Power of 3 round question. If
Yeah.
you were to recommend 3 micro experiments for people during their life or career transitions, what would those 3 micro experiments be like?
I would say the first one would be try for yourself. You can decide what period of time, 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, not saying or doing or thinking anything negative. If you can only think positive things, even if someone does something wrong to you, think positive that there might be a reason why this person did that. Okay, so be very positive about everything that happens to you. You might get hit by a cyclist or by a scooter or a car, but can you maintain positivity in that environment? So that's one micro experiment I would strongly suggest. The second one I would say is stay away from politics for a while. Can you switch off from politics and news for 1 week? I think there's just so much of that occupies our minds. I think that will show how much energy you free up. And the third one I would say is your own health. Think about what you are missing and try and be good to your own body for a week. And these 3 things can be transformational.
Wonderful transformational ideas there, Deepak. Be positive, focus on your health, stay away from news. So simple, try it out, listeners, see the change for yourself. And I must say the teacher did fantastically well in the Power of 3 round.
Thank you.
So as we check along, Deepak, what's next for you?
So what's next for me is continuing to remain in teaching. However, I would move from teaching lower classes to perhaps what are called as A levels in the UK or 11th and 12th in India. So teaching at that level, I find I can probably guide students on the verge of moving into their next stage of their academic careers or otherwise. There's more value I can add there. So from the work standpoint or engagement standpoint, that's an important thing for me to be doing. Aside from that, I don't think of much else.
Okay. And the new teacher in you, does he do something outside of just teaching the class? What does he do to wind down? What does he do to kind of upskill himself?
So I watch a lot of videos on my subject, which is maths. I do that a lot, and that helps me in my teaching. I read books on maths, which is allows me to make the subject more real for my students. I love cricket, so I watch IPL and I watch all the matches. I'm learning how to play classical guitar.
Wow, wonderful.
So
Do we get a sample of it now?
Not yet. I'm not any good. It'll probably take me a few years. So it'll take, so those are the kind of things. And my wife and I, we love to travel. So we try to travel as much as we can during school holidays.
So the next time when I see the headlines, the teacher who became a guitarist, I'll come back to you to do the next podcast interview.
Yeah, that'll be amazing.
Wonderful. Deepak, this has been a lovely conversation. Never in my wildest dream did I think of doing something like this with you in this new avatar. Glad that we are able to do it. Thank you for giving your time and sharing those insights. This podcast is all about creating ripples of inspiration. If there is one Inspire Someone Today message that you would want to share it with all the listeners, what's Deepak's Inspire Someone Today message to all our listeners?
Every country has their own education system, but every country is short of good teachers in schools. I would encourage people to think about how they can contribute to education using their decades of experience and knowledge.
That's a clarion call out there. If you have a passion to teach, if you want to make an impact, go find the school close by and start making those small ripples of inspirations. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off. Until next time, continue to carry the ripples of inspiration. Stay inspired, keep spreading the light.